Got myself some sushi for dinner, ladies and gentlemen. I'm in Cabot Circus. I've just driven here from work. So I'm going to a meetup later where there's free pizza, but I just thought I'd get this just in case, you know. I've also got a little bit of time to kill between now and when I actually have to get there. So I was like, have a little bit of a snack, and then I have to have less pizza when I get there, you know. I don't have to sit there just stuffing my face, because that's my dinner for the evening. It's 10 to 6 ATM, and it's 6 o'clock. No, 10 to 5, and at 5 o'clock, I'm going to move my car into the car park. From 5 o'clock onwards, you can park all night for £2. But if I was to park, I got here about past. If I was to park then, it'd cost me £2.80 to park half an hour, and then £2 all night. So I'm like, fuck it, dump my car around the corner somewhere that's not very safe, somewhere that I wouldn't plan on staying there for longer than 30 minutes. Have some food, move the car to a nice safe car park, and then go to my office. And I might do a little bit of work for an hour, and then go over to the meetup. Looking forward to it, boys. Otherwise, we've got that it's kind of raining, so you've got to kind of wear a coat, but it's also really warm still, so you don't want to wear a proper coat. That kind of annoying weather right now. What I need is a waterproof, an umbrella, you know, but I don't have either of those things. So instead I've got my second driest coat, which is my second warmest coat, which is not the best plan. Yeah, warmest? Yeah, I'm not best at it. My only true waterproof is a proper winter coat that's like snow cold, you know. Yeah, dumped the car in this car park right next to this abandoned shop, and this other shop, which is the only reason this car park is still open. And every time I park here, there's always people that are just waiting for it to go to 5 o'clock so that they can then park next door where it's safer, you know. That was yummy. Otherwise, plan is go to the office, my office, 45 minutes solid hard work, and then go over to Pret, get a drink, because I'm thirsty already. Might get a drink at my office, actually, depends. I haven't got a cup or a bottle or anything, no. So then head over and listen to a talk about gRPC, which is something that's interested me for a while, because I don't really understand what it's for. It doesn't like add up in my mind, because it seems like a thing that people always say is really great for microservices, but it's like the absolute opposite of one of the core pillars of what makes a microservice a microservice. So we'll find out. Having said this, it is something I've looked at for some of my worker slaves stuff. So I've looked at it before. But yeah, so I'm looking forward to it. It's going to be good. It's going to be jolly good stuff. Today was a bit of a stressful one at work. I'm heading over to the thing now. I was just working on my own stuff, and then like all of the shits hit all of the fans. So the thing that I've kind of inherited broke in our test environment. So I was fixing that, and then our deployment to live for the project we've just finished went in. We panicked because it turns out that content are doing some stuff where they're doing A/B testing, and they fucked it up because we'd changed basically the amount of divs on the page, and they were counting how many divs are on the page and then injecting HTML, which just fucked the entire site up basically. So there was a huge panic about how we just told everyone we'd released something and it looked garbage, so we had to roll it back out to figure out what the hell was going on, even though the CEO had just emailed around being like, oh, really good news, we got this live, lol. And then simultaneously then the project that I've inherited in live this time goes to pot, as we take something processes that's not supposed to process for 2 more days, and it did it badly, and it was a bit of a panic to get that back into working order. It's one of them scenarios where you're really thankful for, you often think like, why do people like Microsoft always ham up how quickly you can get a project up from the ground? Like, you can build an MVC in like 3 command line moves, you know. But this thing broke in such a way that there was no fixing it, except, well, you'd have to manually fix a shitload of stuff or write a script effectively, which you could have done in PowerShell arguably, because that's also on .NET, but a .NET Core script, just console app basically. And I was just like, right, okay, got about an hour, let's crack this bitch out. Yeah, I've been complaining about being bored recently, and that was a bit of excitement for my day, so it's good fun. That was a really good little chat, a really good little talk about gRPC and where it's going in .NET Core 3, and like the current state of play and where it looks like it's going to go in the future. I think the talks I've gone to before about gRPC, one of them was at work, and there was another one, I'm trying to remember when that was. The problem is when you do like dumb demos and the like, they're usually pretty dumb and they don't really make much sense. but this guy kind of nailed it down a little bit more. And I think where my confusion was that I was trying to replace a REST microservice with gRPC, but really what you want to do is ignore the gRPC bit. When does RPC make sense? And then use gRPC. So there's scenarios in my own platform where I need to spin up multiple slaves to do something. Probably makes sense to use gRPC, what? This pub looks cool. Looks like a cool, hip, happening place to be. There's a lot of like rowers and stuff as well, look. That's cool. How they go around the corner like that. That's cool. I've never seen that before. You can't even see them, can you? As they steer, they like hit their oar on one side on the water to like slow them down. That's cool. I think like if I had it my way, I'd love to be able to live like close to the city centre. I mean, it's an absolute pig to like have a car around here. You could never have a house like ours. And it'd be ludicrously expensive for anything. But it'd be really good just to be able to go out for a walk at night when you're bored. You know, there's nowhere really to walk around when you go where you live where I am, you know? But like, you're either renting or you've bought a flat for the same money you've paid for our house, and it's like a one bed. So, nah, you're alright, fam. Just trying to figure out where the fuck I think I'm going. I'm going this way, boys. Problem is that it could be the swankiest penthouse suite you've ever seen, but if it hasn't got a garden, Laura doesn't give a shit. Our garden was like the single thing Laura was looking forward to about moving out of our old flat. But yeah, gRPC, interesting technology. It's not like the REST killer, but useful in short. And potentially, like there are places in my platform where I've been thinking about using kind of like a Signal R service, or some kind of event hub. And maybe gRPC could be the replace that, but at the moment it's very much preview, so let's stay away from it. Laura went to bed at about 10 o'clock and I've stayed up, watched an episode of, I got back quite late, I got back at about 9-ish. No, about 8:45, and we played a bit of Overcooked, and then I watched 13 Reasons Why once Laura went to sleep. I've been on my laptop working. I now have my create endpoint implemented. There's a couple of tweaky little things that I need to do. I need to set up the automation tests, number one, so that I can have automation around the, I've got my like validation mapper and all that kind of shit in there. So I need to set up my automation tests. I'm struggling with that because of the way that Specflow has changed how it does scenario contexts. It used to have like a global grab bag where you just put stuff in the context, and I made it really easy to like reuse steps, but now it all uses DI, and it's so complicated because you can't have the steps, you can't share the steps via inheritance, because then they basically duplicate the steps, and then you've got like three versions of the exact same step, but it doesn't know what to pick, so it throws exceptions. Pain in the ass. I'm trying to figure out how to do it properly in a way that I can effectively have given I'm logged in as that step shared across all of the steps I want to do without putting them all on the same fucking class. So I'm trying to figure that one out. And I'm also trying to figure out how to pull off validation in the domain where where I validate against something. So instead of just validating the input, I basically want to take the input with some other data, like with the configuration or with the existing model that you're trying to update, for example. Trying to figure out a pattern that I can do that where I can still kind of use Fluent Validator. I'm hoping to be able to use some kind of Fluent Validator to generate the correct model so I can pump it back out through my validation mapping framework. That's what I'm hoping for, but what I'm scared about is it just automatically injecting it into the DI, because I've got obviously all my validators are all being effectively like scanned and injected in. So I'm trying to figure out a solution for that as well, and I think that's what my problem to solve is going to be tomorrow: automation tests and that, and then I'm probably done for this. Well, no. And then I've got to actually implement that validation, which is going to be a pain in the ass, but we'll get there. Yeah, it won't be a pain in the ass to start with, but it will be eventually. But yeah, I need to solve that problem because the things that you can edit in this microservice are a little bit more loosey-goosey, let's say. compared to the previous one where it's like, oh, you create this, now you gotta add that, done. Oh, you've already had one, tough shit, delete it, add another one. That kind of stuff compared to this one, which is a lot more like you've got something, now you've got to build it. But yeah, to figure out a solution for context injection, validation mapping, and then I need to implement validation mapping and my automation tests. Yeah. Been a right Kino Bino today. Now it's not even 8 o'clock and I'm already walking in. It's like nearly 10 to. My camera battery is basically 0% right now. How low are you? 5%, boys. A solid 5%. So I'll talk to you when I get home, eh? Back from work, ladies and gentlemen. We fixed the problem that we've been experiencing recently, and it's as simple as deploying the wrong code. Everything that we had was like leading up towards the fact that we thought we were deploying the latest code, and I'm like, all the evidence shows that the code that we're running isn't the latest. It can't possibly be the latest. Are you sure it's the latest? And they were like, yes. And I'm like, right, okay, there's something else going on here then. That's super confusing. But we figured it out. We weren't running the same thing, and it's to do with the fact that the projects got renamed. I didn't rename it, but like what operations refer to the platform, the project as, got changed, and it didn't get changed all the way up the pipeline. So at the very top, somewhere at the top, it was pointing to the old one of the old name, and not the new one, which is the one we wanted. So happy days there. In other news, I've just been to the shop because Sainsbury's didn't have a load of stuff. We went shopping on Monday. Cucumber, man, I can't live without fucking cucumber in my sandwich. Speaking of not living without things, I had to go to the shop today because I forgot my crisps. I had to go and buy some crisps from Marks and Spencer's, and they weren't very nice. So otherwise, I've been chipping through. I solved my automation problem. So I solved it by doing the fun stuff of, what did I do? I introduced something called an authorization context. So in Specflow, you can like inject contexts. I actually discovered that the scenario context does still exist, but it's on a base class, which you have to like implement. And you can still get at it, but I decided not to use it. I introduced an authorization context, which is injected in as well as the actual test context that I want. And that has common stuff on it, like the user, the current user, and all that kind of shit. And then that can be injected into the steps that require it. So all the like security stuff I can put onto its own step object. And then all of the test specific stuff just takes that in as well. And the other way I did it was I needed to have access to the response from calling the API. Obviously, the response I'm getting back is going to be different for whatever message I send, because it'll be a different type of generic T. And I needed a way of basically having failure cases, because for failure cases I don't get a message body back, so I don't really care, effectively. So yeah, what I did there was I just extended the client that I'm using to talk to it to just store all the responses it gets. And then I can query the client because the client's already been injected so that I can talk to it in the first place. So I thought that solves that problem. Happy days. I've injected it in, I've got all my automation tests. They're all up and running. Fucking hell, it's hot. One thing I have now to solve is my validation problem. And I think it's only really a problem because of the way I inject validators into my pipeline, my mediator validation stuff. Because that does, it just scans the repository for implementations of an interface, and I need to implement basically the same interface in order to get access to the things I need. And I don't want it to be run at that point because it's going to be done asynchronously, because it needs to go, or could potentially need to go into the database and all that kind of shit. So I've narrowed it down to one problem to solve now. I feel like I've got an idea that it's how possible it is. It can't be, it's not going to be too hard. I've just seen what's for dinner, it's such a faff. There's a lot of stuff to do. Right, I'm going to leave this door open. I'm going to go on my laptop and do a bit more work while I wait for Laura. I hate this fucking contraption. Laura's got like this rope thing here, which we use to hold this door ajar. But it always comes off the handle. I don't know how she does it. Of course it comes off the handle. Yeah, also I'm going to buy my business cards. That's exciting. I'll do that when Laura gets home. Just so I can definitely be like, you like the wording as well, right? Nothing about this design you'll change. Oh dear. Right. Also, 2 weeks. I've got dead on 2 weeks today. and then I've quit. Just ordered my goddamn business card, ladies and gentlemen. I'm excited about that. I've been doing some totting around with some businessy stuff. Finances. How exciting can that be? And some emails and whatnot. Now I'm going to get on to some work. I'm waiting for Laura to come home before I start cooking dinner, because it's a Jamie Oliver 20-minute meal thing, and it's a 20-minute meal. You can only cook it in 20 minutes, or 30 minutes, if you have 3,000 hands and it's already half cooked, you know? So I can't do it by myself. So the problem I need to solve now is that, given the request that you've made, I need to run validation on it to make sure that what you're allowed to do, what you're asking to do, you're allowed to do. So initially, I also came downstairs for something else, and I've forgotten what it fucking was now. Initially, when you first make the request, the API itself doesn't really know much about what you're asking to do. All it knows is the format it's expected to get it in. And it might know some basic rules, but it's quite a flat object and there's lots of different things you can do with it, in theory. There isn't yet, but there will be. So you make a request to it and it knows, for example, what type you want. You're like, you need to pass me this, it needs to be in a valid format. If it's not in a valid format, I'm going to kick you a bad request. It then dives it into the domain. When it goes into the domain, it goes in as a CQRS command. The CQRS command goes through one of my mediator pipelines, which scans for validators against that command and runs them. This is the thing that's causing me issues right now, and I told you that door closes. So that will scan for any instance of iValidator that's added to DI, run the validation against it. At that point, we're no longer working with the initial request given to the user, given to the platform. We're working with the command that then generates. Because we generated a very specific command, we're generating a separate command for each type that you're trying to operate on or do work with. That type there has stricter rules. So for example, for the one I've got at the moment, you have to provide a technology stack. But for a different type of pipeline, you wouldn't have to do that. So at this point, I now know that amount of information and I can do it. Next thing. At this point, I still don't really know much else. The other thing is that I know you need to provide a value. Oh no, so if I also get a validation error, what I do is I pass it back through my validation mapper, it goes all the way back, and then it figures out, based on what was invalid about on the command, it will figure out which fields you got wrong on your user input, and then tell you which fields you got wrong with the error message as defined in the domain. So say for example, you didn't pass this field and you weren't allowed to do it. If the field was called required field in the domain, but the field is called name in the user request, it will also map that. It's really fucking clever. I love it very much. I'm very proud of that piece of code I've thrown together there. It's a brilliant format. So next question is, now after that, I know you have to pass that information, but I don't necessarily know which values you're allowed to pass, because part of the configuration is that some pipelines might not necessarily support each tech stack, for example. So let's say you wanted to do .NET, maybe you have to put it through the custom pipeline. If you want to do BASIC, maybe BASIC only supports Java and NPM, who knows? What does know is the configuration. So I need to, at some point now, I need to write a validator that can go and get the value from the configuration, which will often mean pulling data from a database. In this case, it's just configuration, but in real world, it will be getting it from what's my doohickey. The question I'm asking, the question I want to know the answer to now is, what does this class look like? It looks like an abstract validator, but on what type? Is it the command that you passed in? Probably. Or is it on the domain object it's creating? In theory, I could get it to create or edit. No, that won't. It's probably on the command it's bringing in. Because in other scenarios, I'm rubber ducking. In other scenarios, in this scenario, it's literally I want to check against the configuration to make sure that what you've passed me is a valid configuration. That's cool. But in other situations, you will be pulling the existing information out of the database and then going, are you allowed to do this thing? But in that scenario, what the command is going to do, the command is going to apply a modification to the existing data, not create something completely from scratch. Right, okay, so I've answered my question. Thank you very much. So my plan is to add a new interface so that it doesn't clash with the interface that's automatically pulled in by Mediator pipelines. And it's a little bit more, so it's got basically like a validate async on it. And then I want to use the standard rules that are available to me in Abstract Validator, in an Abstract Validator, in order to figure out whether or not this thing is valid. I just need to figure out how to write that now. Cold beans! I'm having fun. I figured out what I'm gonna do. Where's Laura? One thing is, do I want to call these things validators? Because like the thing I'm trying effectively doing is like, and I came down from my notepad, is hydrating the model with more and more information and then running validation at different points. Yes, in theory, I could dive it all the way down into the domain and then just do the validation there. But then I could potentially end up with issues if I rely on certain things being in there for mappers to work on all that kind of garbage. But is this a validator? It is a validator. What's a different word for validator? Because I mean, like, it's not really it's not the same kind of validator as the other validators. So I kind of want to differentiate it a bit. I figured out a strategy for my validator stuff. It involved monkey wrenching around in how Fluent Validation works, which is the NuGet package. It's quite difficult to get that. I want the power that it has, but it's quite difficult to kind of monkey wrench in your own asynchronous stuff because of the way it's designed. It's supposed to be like effectively static singletons, effectively, and I want like asynchronous calls, so I can't like save it to a property. The actual real bit that you're just in the constructor where you set up all the rules. It's quite complicated, but there is like a pre-validation step which you can override that isn't asynchronous. I think I figured it out. You can effectively piss about with a validation context and add extra data onto it. It's not great, it's not like particularly type safe, it's a bit of a hackaroo, but it'll work. It'll work, and it's all contained in the same class, so it's not like another class will be consuming this object. It'll all be self-contained, so I think that's fine. I think I should find enough time to play with that and get that finished by the end of the day. I'm hoping. I have an automation test already set up, ready to rock and roll to prove that it works. So I just need to write the code itself and then, well, the unit test and then the code itself. But yeah, it's going to be an interesting thing to unit test, let's put it that way, because of how you build the rules up and how you build up the data that the rules need. It's quite a complicated situation, but we'll get there. We'll figure it out. We'll figure it out, boy. What else is going on today? Don't know. We might have refining today. I think we're starting to refine tickets for the next project. That should add a bit of flavour to my day. There was no refining, but we did get some sauce. Sauce. Also, I can't wait till I don't have to sit in work chairs because they're so uncomfortable and my neck is just like fucked. I can't lean down without my back hurting. Chairs are so bad for your posture. We fixed the live issue that we had the other day. We worked with the business in customer services to figure out what to do with some issues that fell out of the fact that we'd processed something 2 days later than it should have done. We had like 16 customers who had effectively fallen into a state that is no longer, what they'd asked to do is no longer valid. So we had to figure out how to work with them. So I was working with the business on that, and then I was working with the business trying to pull out some metrics out of the databases. Bit of a wild, wonky one with just like lots of different weird stuff going on. So it wasn't too bad. I also figured out how to do my validators. I've got the validator, I've got like the pattern I'm going to flow through. I've also got test helpers so that, I don't know if you've used Fluent Validation before, but they're useful test helpers that make testing it super easy. So I'm going to NuGet package it all up, put it into my, I've already got a NuGet package for this. what's that package? I think it's called like framework.validation. I have a number of different Nougat packages that help with things that I'm used, and I'm intending on sharing out eventually, but this is a bit too niche to be shared out. But yeah, I've proved the concept. It works nicely. And before I package it all up, I'm going to, I've done the unit tests for the thing itself. I'm going to wire it in and then run it so I get my integration test passing. As soon as I got my integration test passing, I'll check that in, push it up, and then move it out into a separate Nougat package, update it, make sure everything still passes, move on with my life. That's my plan of attack, ladies and gentlemen. It's good, but yeah, it went well, so it's been a good day apart from my back, which is a bit screwed. Yeah, otherwise we have cooking to do. We're cooking a lot of recipes this week, so cooking's taking a lot. It's taking a lot longer than usually. Normally I'm like cooked basically for when Laura gets home, but because we're doing recipes, today's recipe is like a 20-minute recipe thing. Beef and black beans, really nice. Do you have black bean? Oh, this might screw this over. Lol, I don't think I should. Did I do the list or did Laura do the list? I think Laura did the list, so assuming we do have black bean, I don't have to go out and try and find some, because black bean is, yeah, we do. This black bean here, really difficult to find, because it's like only very few shops actually import this. You have to go to like actual Asian shops, not to supermarkets, especially not to a small supermarket. Some big supermarkets have it, but words. So yeah, I am going to chip through some work while I wait for Laura to come home, and then chill out with her. So that's my plan. What's your plan? I don't know. Don't really care. Is this how long this video is? It's quite a long video. Or is this 2 days worth of footage on this camera? So like, I'm trying to figure out, the one thing I'm trying to figure out with this is I have the validator set up. It's configured now. I could move it away. And at the moment it's quite a generic interface. So you just pass it the thing you want validating, and then it will pull the data. It knows what it's validating, obviously, and then it pulls the data that it needs itself. And then, am I getting a nosebleed? I'm just trying to figure out if I'm getting a nosebleed or not. It pulls the data that it needs to help it do its validation, and then does its validation. Now, the problem with this is that the chances are I'm already doing some of that. Like in this one scenario, I'm not pulling out the configuration in order to check whether or not it's valid. But I've probably already pulled, if you're doing an edit, I've probably already pulled it from the database in order to confirm that it exists. To be like, yeah, you're not trying to edit something that doesn't exist. Probably. So how can I defend against that from a like, because what I wanted to do was inject one interface. I really like Nougat packages and stuff that you inject one thing into. You inject like iMapper or iValidator, and then you just do iValidator.validate, just fucking throw it an object, and then it goes off and does it all. So you don't have to have, if you have like a command handler that's handling 4 different commands, I don't have to inject 4 different validators into that. It'd be a pain in the ass. I can just inject the validator thing, you call it, it figures out which validator to use underneath, and then uses that validator. But, so what I was thinking of is there a way I can build this interface so that you can optionally pass it extra information? And if you pass it that information, then it knows it doesn't have to go get it itself. You've already got it, so you can pass it. Obviously, if I use the same interface, then I can basically define the interface per the object. But then it's not an interface, is it? It's a. I'm trying to figure out what the cost is of doing this via a generic interface. Oh no, sorry. I'm trying to figure out whether the cost of calling the database twice to get the data out, to make sure it's valid, it's a valid operation, is worth the reduced cost of having to inject in multiple things and not having a nice consistent interface. It's nice that the validator knows what it wants and goes and get it itself. It's better that the mediator, like the pipeline, doesn't have to figure out for itself what it is. And there's no real way that I can design an interface that would allow me to pass in effectively a generic list of things like a pipeline and the existing data, for example, and go, hey, since I've given you these two things, don't bother getting it yourself. There's no way I could do that, is there? Maybe this, like in the future, potentially, if I decide that this becomes a bit of a pain point, I could add an endpoint in it that effectively takes some kind of context object, like a dictionary, and then analyzes its dictionary to figure out if it's got the data it needs. If it doesn't, it goes and gets it. So I could do something like that, and then I could keep it generic. Yeah, okay, I've decided I'll do that in the future. Yagni, you're probably not going to need it, so don't do it if you don't need it. That's always the problem. That's the problem I specifically have. I have no pressure apart from my own pressure that I put on myself to decide what is important and what's not important. This sounds like something that doesn't count as important, you know? So, yeah. Carry on. Carry on as is, and we'll figure out later if we ever need to do it. If a database operation becomes specifically expensive, calling it twice. Why can't you see me, camera? That's the point where I extend this interface to allow some kind of generic way. But there is no better than generic way of doing this, I don't think. Like, there's no way you could do it type safe. You'd have to pass in objects and then cast them, which isn't nice. I'm just thinking about it because I'm about to wire it in. It works, I've tidied it all up. I just need to wire it in basically and just make it nice and pretty. Well, I've found exactly where it gets complicated, ladies and gentlemen. And it's diving from a context of not knowing what the type is at runtime, at compile time, to one where I need to know where it is. And it's like you set up a strategy so that it can cast from an object to this, but then when the error comes out, I need to know what type it is so that I can pump it through my validation mapping. It's going to be complicated. I tried to like tweak it together, it's just not happening for me. Otherwise, I was actually feeling tired earlier, but we got a free trial of Now TV, so we started watching Chernobyl. And I needed to watch something a little bit happier to fucking cheer myself up before I go to bed. Jesus Christ. So I've been watching YouTube videos. I haven't been doing any work. Just YouTube vids. While Laura went to bed. And I'm going to call it, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to call it for the day and for the video as well. So thank you very much for watching. We have one more day at work and then the weekend. I need to get my hair cut this weekend. That's number one. So come back for that, fucker. But yeah, so thank you very much for watching this video, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will catch you later.